Hi, and welcome to a special Deep Space episode of InstaVision. I'm Glenn Reynolds. I'm joined by Rand Simberg. He's a recovering aerospace engineer, and he's the author of Safe is Not an Option, Overcoming the Futile Obsession with Getting Everyone Back Alive That is Killing Our Expansion into Space. Welcome, Rand. So what's wrong with getting back alive?
I'm all in favor of getting back alive. But, you know, 30,000 people don't get back alive when they get in their cars every year, roughly. And if we said, well, they all have to get back alive, then we probably wouldn't be driving much.
Well, you know, that's absolutely right. And, you know, do you think that I mean, in the early days of the space program, being an astronaut was seen as very dangerous. And that was because, you know, as they famously said, our rockets always blow up in the beginning. And people knew that, and it was part of it. In fact, you know, Tom Wolfe wrote that the glamour of astronauts in the 1960s came from the high risk of death. Do you think NASA just sort of squashed that?
I wouldn't necessarily blame NASA for it, but it has been squashed, I'd say. I think a lot of things have happened. What happened was that it was okay to risk people's lives back in the 60s because what we were doing is important. But once we beat the Russians to the moon, really after Apollo 8, it wasn't that important anymore, and they didn't want to risk astronauts' lives on something that didn't seem to be that important.
You know, and yet, you know, we have in fact lost astronauts. We lost both the Challenger and the Columbia with all hands on board. And as you point out, part of the tragedy in that was not just that people died, but it's that they died doing something that wasn't very important. Right,
exactly. I think that's my thesis, is why people were so upset when we killed those astronauts, because they didn't, you know, they're doing on Columbia the biggest, it's not the only thing they were doing, but the most publicized part of that mission was doing science fair experiments for kids. And, you know, nobody's opposed to doing science fair experiments for kids, but should we be spending $1 billion and you know, killing 7 people in order to accomplish that? If they'd been going off as part of an armada, Bruce Willis style, to, you know, blow up an asteroid that was going to wipe us out, people probably wouldn't have been so upset.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good angle to that. Although I think there's also sort of a cultural thing. I mean, we take it for granted, weirdly, that people do all sorts of dangerous things. I mean, you know, people die every year climbing Mount Everest, and that's a fundamentally pointless activity at this point. And yet, when that happens, people don't say, well, this is such a tragedy, we shouldn't climb Mount Everest anymore. Whereas I think every time somebody does die in a space accident or something, people act as if it calls the whole thing into question. Do you think, why do you think that is?
You know, I really don't know. I think it's mostly because going into space, what we're doing in space, human space flight is just not viewed as important. So why are we killing people doing this? And not only that, but spending so much money to do it on such a thing that doesn't seem to be important, that we don't really have any real purpose in mind for. You know, we don't know why we have a spaceflight program. Everybody sort of thinks they do. There's always these underlying assumptions in the debate, but they're not necessarily shared, and they're not laid out there.
So how should we address these issues?
Well, I think we should address the issues by saying forthrightly, or at least deciding, why do we have a human spaceflight program? If the purpose is to develop and settle space, which I think is really the only justifiable purpose for having one, then clearly we'd be going about it a lot differently, and we'd have a lot different attitude toward risk, because we've never opened a frontier. As I wrote at Reason yesterday, in fact, I had a piece up there. We've never opened a frontier without killing people. That's just part of opening frontiers.
That's right.
And this is the harshest frontier that humanity has ever faced.
You know, most of Magellan's crew didn't make it back alive, including Magellan himself. There was pretty high attrition on lots of those kind of expeditions. And even, of course, 100 years ago, when Antarctica was first being explored, a lot of people died. And that was seen as sort of a normal part of exploring places that were dangerous and new. Maybe because space is so clean, or spacecraft seems so clean, it seems wrong somehow that it should be dangerous. But of course it is.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think maybe science fiction's had something to do with it. I don't know. But I mean, you know, people die in Star Trek. People die in Star Wars. Things blow up. Things go bad. And you know, we just saw in the movie Gravity, which is a beautiful movie. The physics are kind of iffy. on it, but it certainly demonstrates that space can be a dangerous place. It probably overhypes, in fact, how dangerous low Earth orbit is. As I said in my reason piece, that's a useful reminder that this is a frontier, and we have to let people take their own risks.
Perhaps we should put all space travelers in red shirts so that people will know that they're expected to die by the end of the show. No. So you said, actually, in your Reason article, you said that the real danger isn't to NASA so much, because NASA's not doing much anyway, but to commercial space flight. But haven't the authorities actually been, so far at least, surprisingly reasonable regarding risks with commercial space flight and space tourism and so on?
They have, because we managed to get the law written to get them to be back in 2004, when everybody thought that within 2 or 3 years the skies are going to be black with suborbital space planes. So they had an 8-year moratorium put in place, and everybody thought that would be enough time for us to be flying these things and learning how to fly them, and then maybe it'd be okay for AST to start, the FAA office that regulates spaceflight, for them to start regulating the safety of the passengers of the vehicles. But it's been frighteningly almost, I guess just this last month, what is it, 13 minus 4, higher math, that many years since Burt Rutan won the X Prize, and nobody's flown yet. I think most people now are expecting X-Corps to fly next year, and probably Virgin as well. But they're only going to start flying, and we're not getting that learning period. We just recently got that moratorium extended for a couple of years, but it's only for 2 years from now, just through October of 2015. And one of my policy recommendations, both in that piece I wrote yesterday and in the book, is that we should extend it not just for another 8 years, and not just 8 years from when we start flying, but indefinitely. Because it's not clear what problem we're trying to solve by that kind of regulation. If people are dying, willy-nilly and for stupid reasons, and it seems like the industry is out of control, okay, then you might say, okay, well, maybe the FAA should step in and do something. But as you said, people go to climb Everest. People do free diving. People do wingsuiting. All these things are very dangerous activities. About 2% of free divers, I think, die every year. And as Jim Bennett once said, the most dangerous way to get to 29,000 feet is to walk there, but the government doesn't regulate it.
That's certainly true. Well, what sort of takeaway point do you hope that people who read your book will walk away with?
That we need to think more seriously about space. So we need to start taking it seriously. And part of taking it seriously is accepting the fact that people are going to be injured and die there. And not to, as the old John Shedd inspirational poster says, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. If we're going to go out in space, we're going to have to take some risk and accept it.
Well, I hope that lesson resonates widely, because it's true. Not much is accomplished in this world without risk, and outer space is not Disneyland, even though they have space rides in Disneyland. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Great to be here.
And that's Rand Simberg. He's the author of Safe is Not an Option, Overcoming the Futile Obsession with Getting Everyone Back Alive That is Killing Our Expansion into Space. And he blogs at transterrestrial.com. Check it out. Thanks to all of you for orbiting with us this week. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.